All right, let's get into part two of three, where we'll cover some gender differences in personality. And so this is obviously a very popular topic. It's certainly something that doesn't have a shortage of books about it, research articles, news articles, you name it. This has been a very popular thing to think about and to look at. But relative to how much this gets focused on, the actual gender differences based on various psychological characteristics are very small. And so there's evidence of differentiation, and we'll talk about in the next lecture how assigned gender roles and socialization, things like that can have an influence on this rather than underlying differences in motivation. Because as we'll get at in this video, those underlying differences in motivation seem to be very, very limited and small when present. And so with roles and learning roles, this is obviously something that starts very early on, even before birth, actually, with things like gender reveals, right? And then upon birth, there are so many differentials. Just a couple popular ones are different toys, different ways that parents will go about training, teaching their children based on gender, different colors that we buy. And there are certainly different media presentations based on gender. And so this can occur and show up in advertisements, movies, shows, differentiations in screen time. So as we see here, there are differences in uh, the likelihood of being a speaking character based on gender. From research done between 2007 2012, difference in sexually revealing clothing, actors being naked in movies, TV shows, um, a having a balanced cast, even especially when talking about things like prominent roles. And so yeah, this is something that is all over the place, is differences in gender roles. One thing to think about in terms of this specifically is maybe even go off and do some of your own research about this. Is this was from 2007 2012, so question whether you think that these stats here would still be true today, or whether this has changed at all. And so, getting at gender differences in personality, there certainly seems to be larger differences in physical characteristics, so things like height, weight, um, than differences in motivations or differences in personality. And so, of course, well, again, we're going to get into roles later on, but there are certainly some biological components to personality. But with personality, gender differences seem to be very small. This chart is looking at effect size differences here between men and women, and the chart itself makes these differences seem very large. They're not. So this is talking about effect sizes here, the largest one being 0.17. That's a very small effect size. We're talking about small fractions of standard deviation differences here. And so things that, at least without knowledge of the stereotypes, these are things that you're probably not going to notice in day-to-day life based on the extremely small size of these effects. But anyways, um, with these personality differences, acknowledging that they are small, there seem to be differences where men relative to women are more impulsive, differences in locus of control, although that one is especially tiny. And then men seem to be more assertive as well. And then women on average, again, small effect size, seem to be um, showing greater amounts of anxiety. And yeah, so with this, again, across genders, not a whole lot of differences, some small effects. Within genders, there do seem to be there seems to be a lot more variation than between genders. And getting into some big five factor, or at least big five factor subscales, so smaller sections of some of these big five personality traits. We see men again higher in assertiveness, women higher in gregariousness, tend to be more tender-minded, differences in orderliness, things like that. Again, as with the previous personality traits, small effects. And so with this, looking at differences in personality based on gender, there is the overarching theme of, while some of these stereotypes, and of course there are a lot of them, they seem to be everywhere, getting back to the point, how many books and articles and things like that there are on this topic. While certain gender-based stereotypes may not be completely inaccurate, again, there are certain effects that, based on empirical research, seem to be in place on average. These are likely blown way out of proportion. A couple differences and motivations to note that do seem to be larger than the small effect sizes we were talking about with personality. A lot of this has to do with sex and reproduction differences. So differences in strength of sex drive. Obviously, men on average have higher sex drives. We talked about this earlier in more of the biological motivation section with parental investment theory, differences between relative value with sex and resources and staying to parent the kid, things like that. And there also seem to be differences in social spheres. So on average, men seem to be more likely to have more broad social spheres. And so, in other words, a higher quantity of friends in general. And this is a nice segue into the next section, in which we will talk about social roles and theory behind social roles, as it's certainly possible that differences in motivation such as this are due to what we learn from birth in terms of social role expectations. And so that's it for this second video here. In the final video of motivation, we'll get into social roles and changes in motivation.